The day I found out my best friend wasn't who I thought they were. I've known my best friend, Jake, for over 10 years. We met in college, bonded over our shared love of bad action movies, and even teamed up on a group project that turned into an all-night adventure involving a broken vending machine and a very angry campus security guard. Over the years, we became inseparable. Jake was the kind of guy who could make you laugh even on your worst days. He was charming, quick-witted, and, as far as I knew, completely trustworthy. So when he called me up one night, sounding defeated and asking if he could crash at my place for a while after a messy breakup, I didn't think twice. Of course, he could stay. That's what friends are for, right? At first, it was great. It felt like a throwback to our college days. Jake moved in with just 2 suitcases, a duffel bag, and a backpack. We spent the first week catching up, binge-watching old episodes of The Office, and ordering way too much takeout. It was like having a live-in best friend again, and I honestly didn't mind the company. But it didn't take long for things to start feeling off. For starters, Jake was always on his phone. And I mean always. He'd be glued to the screen from the moment he woke up to the second he went to bed. At first, I chalked it up to him texting friends or scrolling through social media, normal stuff. But the way he'd hunch over his phone, angling the screen away from me, made it clear he didn't want me seeing what he was doing. He also started taking long phone calls late at night, speaking in hushed tones that made it impossible to hear what he was saying. If I asked about it, he'd shrug it off and say it was just work stuff or a friend checking in. But the tone of his voice during those calls didn't sound casual. It sounded serious, maybe even tense. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard the front door creak open. I was up late working on a project for my job, so I peeked out of my room to see what was going on. Jake was slipping out the door, carrying his black duffel bag. He didn't see me and I didn't stop him. I figured he was just blowing off steam, maybe heading to a 24-hour gym or something. But when he came back hours later, just as the sun was coming up, he didn't have the duffel bag anymore. The next morning, I casually asked where he'd gone the night before. He gave me a sheepish grin and said he couldn't sleep, so he went for a walk. When I asked about the bag, he froze for just a split second before brushing it off. "Oh, I left it in my car," he said. But here's the thing, Jake didn't have a car. He'd sold it months ago after moving to the city. That's when I started to feel like something was really wrong. Things got even weirder a few days later. I came home early from work to find Jake in the living room with 2 guys I'd never seen before. They looked rough. Tattoos, leather jackets, and the kind of permanent scowl that makes you instinctively want to cross the street. The second I walked in, the room went silent. Jake quickly introduced them as old friends, but the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The 2 guys barely acknowledged me before leaving a few minutes later, muttering something to Jake on their way out. When I asked him about it later, he just said they were passing through and needed a place to hang out for a bit. I didn't believe him, but I didn't push it. That night, my curiosity got the better of me. While Jake was in the shower, I decided to take a look in his room. I know it was a huge invasion of privacy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His door was unlocked, and his stuff was neatly packed into his suitcases and backpack. But in the back of his closet, tucked behind some clothes, I found a small locked box. It wasn't hard to open. I used a paperclip. Inside, I found a collection of things that made my stomach drop. There were at least 3 fake IDs, each with Jake's photo but different names. A wad of cash, easily a few $1,000s, was bundled with rubber bands. There was also a burner phone and a small notebook filled with names, dates, and numbers. None of it made any sense to me, but it was clear that Jake was hiding something big. When Jake came out of the shower, I confronted him. I held up the box and asked him to explain. At first, he tried to laugh it off, saying it was just a joke and that the fake IDs were from a prank he pulled years ago. But when I pressed him, his whole demeanor changed. He got defensive, then angry. He accused me of not trusting him and said I had no right to go through his stuff. I told him I just wanted the truth, but he stormed out of the apartment before I could get any answers. The next day, Jake came back, but he wasn't alone. The 2 guys from before were with him, and they didn't look happy. Jake grabbed his bags and left without saying a word. One of the guys shot me a look that sent chills down my spine, like a silent warning not to ask questions. And just like that, Jake was gone. In the weeks that followed, I tried to piece together what had happened. I even reached out to a mutual friend from college to see if they'd heard from Jake. That's when I learned something that made everything click. Apparently, Jake had been involved in some shady business for years, selling counterfeit goods, maybe even drugs. No one knew for sure, but everyone agreed that he wasn't the same guy we'd known in college. Looking back, I feel like an idiot for not seeing the signs sooner. Jake had always been a little too good at talking his way out of trouble, a little too secretive about certain parts of his life. I wanted to believe he was just going through a rough patch, but the truth was much darker. I haven't heard from Jake since he left, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Part of me hopes he's okay, that he's turned his life around. But another part of me is just glad he's not my problem anymore. Letting him into my home was a mistake, and it's one I won't make again.